Would you all please be seated? When I was about 6 years old, I was a little boy with a very big problem. Now, I'm sure that there were other kids in my predicament, but at that time I didn't know of any, and I assumed that I was the only person in the world with this particular quandary. And the problem was this: I didn't know how to ride a bicycle. Every other person I knew, every other person on the entire planet, for all I knew how to ride a bike. It wasn't that I didn't try. I can't tell you the number of times I tried to learn. But no matter how many times I tried, no matter what I tried, no matter who it was who tried to teach me, no matter how humiliating it was to have to own up to this inability of mine, I still couldn't quite get the knack for it. And I only had skinned knees and elbows and a severely damaged ego to show for all of my efforts. Well, that summer, I went out to my grandmother's house out in North Dakota. And it was to my grandmother that I confessed my dire situation. Now, you've got to understand that my grandmother was about as stereotypical a grandmother that anyone could have had in the early 1960s. She had been widowed for about 10 years at that point and lived alone on the family farm. Although she was only in her 70s at that time, in my mind, she was ancient. So for all I knew, she could have been 150 years old. She had long gray hair, which she braided every morning. And then she would twist those braids into a bun at the back of her head, and then she would hold them into place with a handful of bobby pins. She always wore a dress that fell just below her knee. And the only time that she didn't have an apron on was when she would go from house into town. And even then, she would often forget to take the apron off. And so she would be working at the church or wandering up and down the aisles of the local Piggly Wiggly supermarket, looking like she had just stepped out of her kitchen, which, in fact, she had. In fact, my grandmother looked a whole lot like a much more slender version of Aunt Bee from the Andy Griffith Show. And she acted just about the same way. Well, I didn't expect anything from my grandmother other than a sympathetic ear for listening to my tale of woe regarding my bicycle riding misadventures. But much to my surprise, she said instead, "Tomorrow, why don't we see what we can do about that?" And the next morning, she and I headed out to the barn, where she had a couple of dusty bikes propped up against some farm implements. She found one of those old-fashioned tire pumps and inflated the tires well enough at least to hold air for a while. And she said, "Let's give it a go." And with that, she had me hop up onto the bike seat as she gently walked the bike along the driveway between the barn and the house, with me hanging on for dear life. And every time she would let go, my hands would start to quiver, and the bike would wander from side to side, and I would go careening off into the tall grass on one side of the driveway or the other, and land in a heap. And then Grandma would come over, and she would pick me up, and she would wipe me off a little bit, and she would brush away the tears that were beginning to form in the corners of my eyes. And she would say, "Let's try it a little differently this time." And then she would attempt some slight variation on a theme. I mean, maybe she would stand on the other side of the bike. Or maybe she would stand right behind me with her hands on my hips to hold me steady. Each time was a little better, but inevitably I would stumble along and tumble over one side or the other. And then Grandma finally said, "Why don't I just go inside for a while and let you work on it by yourself for a little bit?" Well, as you can probably imagine, within about a half an hour, I was dashing full speed back into her kitchen, yelling and screaming for all I was worth that Grandma had to come outside, and she had to come outside right now to see what had happened. And as soon as we were outside, I climbed on that bike and rode it like I had known how to ride a bike my entire life. It was a day I will never forget. One of the most enduring images I have for God in my life is my grandmother standing at my side and teaching me how to ride a bicycle. Like the gardener in Jesus' parable this morning, she was not willing to give up on me. And she was not willing to let me give up on myself. And she was willing to continue to try new ideas, new approaches, new alternatives, until the moment happened and life was changed forever. The temptation, which I think we all have from time to time, is to give up. To give up on ourselves, to give up on one another, when life just gets too hard. You know, to give up on a dream, to give up on a relationship, to give up on a career, to give up on a personal mission, to give up on our life quest. And like the landowner in today's parable, we are tempted to say, you know, I have tried this long enough. I'm tired of waiting. Cut it down so it won't keep wasting my time and energy. And then, like a gentle gardener, God comes along, sometimes in the person of someone like my grandmother, and replies, well, let's just take a look at this from a different angle. Let's loosen up the soil and add some fertilizer around the edges to freshen things up a little and see if we can make something work. Now, I know it may take some time, but we can still work on this just a little bit longer. You know, this need to produce, and to produce right now, is one of the big problems which faces the world today, especially here in fast-paced Southern California. I was talking with a woman once who worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the FBI. And she was saying that it is the policy of the FBI that every 5 years, it is, in her words, up or out. In other words, either you advance, you get promoted, or you're out the door. Up or out. It's a management standard which crosses disciplines and fields. Did you know that in the United States military, the 1980 Defense Officer Personnel Management Act mandates that officers passed over twice for promotion are required to be discharged? In the academic world, the phrase is publish or perish, where you either get yourself published in professional journals or by writing books, or your career will be short-lived. The turnover rate for startup companies in the Silicon Valley up in the Bay Area, or for Silicon Beach over on the west side of LA, is sometimes measured in months, if there's not some kind of immediate return on the investors' dollars. And yes, it's also that time of year when all of the mid-season replacements are finding their way onto our television screens, taking the place of other shows which didn't make the grade, sometimes after only a couple of episodes. It didn't matter whether those shows that got canceled were good or not. It only mattered whether enough advertising dollars were flowing in to justify keeping them on the air. Again and again and again, the message remains the same. Produce, do it now, or get out of the way. And it is into that world of immediate gratification, immediate results, immediate return on investment, immediate success, that God steps in and says, sometimes good things come to those who wait. Sometimes something as simple as taking a step or two back can give us a whole new perspective on the landscape in front of us. It's important to remember, however, that waiting is not merely a passive activity. In this morning's gospel lesson, the gardener didn't just do nothing with the fig tree while waiting for another year to roll around. You know, if you find yourself stuck waiting for some door to open in your life, and you're not doing anything different to try to figure out how to get it to open, chances are you'll be waiting for a long time. It's the classic Alcoholics Anonymous definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result. As the old saying goes, the person who stands at the corner with their mouth wide open, waiting for a roast duck to fly in, has a long wait in store. So don't give up on your dreams, but at the same time, if you are waiting for opportunity to come knocking, perhaps a fresh coat of paint on that door will make it a little more attractive when opportunity does come wandering by. Or in the words of that inestimable theologian and social scientist, Dolly Parton, if you don't like the road you're walking, start paving another one. The invitation from God is that we are neither alone in this world and compelled to make it all up on our own, nor are we simply destined to fall victim to whatever external forces might be pushing in on all sides. Rather, the invitation from God is that we might share with God in this holy work of transformation within ourselves, within one another, within our community, within all of God's creation. You know, one of the greatest sources of comfort and reassurance that I have in my life is knowing that ours is a God of second chances. Like I learned in all of my failed experiences in trying to learn how to ride a bicycle. God doesn't ask us to be successful. God asks only that we be faithful. And the promise is that God will be faithful to us as well. The opportunity that we have been given is to embody that God of second chances in our own lives, both within ourselves and with those around us. And so when you or someone you know is caught in a cycle of hopelessness or despair or failure, the question becomes, are you willing to take on the role of the gardener? To step in and offer to till the soil a little bit and to add some fresh fertilizer here and there and to seek the possibility of new life. That is the hope of the gospel. That is the promise of God. And most importantly, that is the gift of believing in the power of resurrection. Amen.